Hi, welcome to Gorilla Cues Around the Globe. Today we're making pork leg with some crackling. It's going to be a collection of stills rather than a video because I was making this for my Christmas lunch and the family would have been wildly upset if I'd have got out all the video equipment. So let's get on with it. So the cut of meat we have is the back leg or the ham of the pig. It's only a couple of big muscles, so it won't make pulled pork in the same way that the shoulder does. So what we need to do is cook this to a point where it slices and makes sort of pork steaks. The aim is to bring it to about 145 internal, and then because it is skin on, make delicious, gorgeous crackling that will just crunch and melt in your mouth and be fabulous. So there it is, 20 pounds of pork glory, skin on, and clearly far too large to be cooked sensibly, so it needs to be butchered. So basically now what I've done is I've sliced them in half to create two cuts that are about 10 to 12 pounds a piece. So you can see what the goal is here. By cutting it that way, it'll lie flat on the barbecue, be an easier thing to cook, plus 10 to 12 pounds of pork is probably more than enough for one meal. So we're doing this a few days ahead of time to make sure that crackling is perfect. The first thing you've got to do is you've got to score it, and you're cutting through the skin into the fat, but hopefully not cutting the flesh. So what I've done here is a crosshatch pattern and some zigzags and just generally played with it, but the idea is just score it heavily so that you can start to dry out that skin. Next, get a pan of boiling water, and that's actually boiling on the stove, and what we're going to do is dip the skin side into that water just for a couple of seconds all the way around, and just to help it tighten up the skin and start the drying process. So you can see how just a couple of seconds, a quick dip in the water has tightened the skin, opened up the scores and got it ready to start producing some beautiful crackling. Next, you're going to rub it in salt and then put it in the fridge for a couple of days to continue to dry out that skin. This is what we're aiming for. So, setting up for the cook. Indirect, the Gorilla Cue holding the coals off to one side. There's probably 30-35 lit coals in there. I want the cooking temperature to be 325 to 350, and then let it run for probably a couple of hours. You can see there it's a very large piece of meat. I'm going to put a thermometer into the pork, and I'm aiming for an internal temperature of 135, perhaps getting up to 140 before I start the second stage of the cook, which is going very hot to make that crackling. Notice that there's no wood chunks on the fire. This doesn't need a lot of smoke. I may have put one, maybe two lumps of apple on there just to add a little bit of smoke, but really you don't want a great deal. So we're about 2 hours in. It's got to that 135 internal temperature. You can see it's taken on some colour and we're about ready to get the crackling done. What we need to do is now get the Weber super hot. To get it super hot, you add more fuel and you add more air, and that's exactly what I did there. I added perhaps another 30 hot charcoal briquettes to the fire, and then held the top open with that little piece of wood so the air would gush up from the side of the Gorilla Cue, probably at 550 degrees is what I was measuring at the dome, across the top of the pork, and then exit out through the side of the lid that's been propped up with that piece of wood. And that was probably running at 500 degrees for the best part of 30 minutes. During that time, I probably rotated the pork maybe 2 or 3 times to make sure that as much of the skin as possible got exposed to that very, very hot air. Crackling happens fast. 5 to 10 minutes of exposure is usually enough to start getting it to crisp up. So you want to watch this and lift that lid regularly to make sure it doesn't get burned. The finished result: beautiful crisp crackling and pork that is the right serving temperature of 145. That's when it's still got plenty of moistness. It hasn't dried out, but it's been cooked to a safe temperature, and then you've got that gorgeous crackling as like the cherry on top. Fabulous. To serve, you literally just carve it into large slices and present on the plate. But first of all, make a big show of just how gorgeous that crackling is. Okay, a few people asked what did the actual meat look like when it was cut open. I didn't have a picture on the day, but this is a cold cut from the following day. And what you can see is it's got a lovely light pink colour because it was only cooked to 145. Pork tends to turn white when you get to that 165 level. What you can see is the crackling is just starting to lift off the fat, and you can also see the kind of fibrous, the cellulose-like texture of the crackling layer as it fills with air pockets, with bubbles, as a result of the very high heat. Finally, you can see the two types of fat: the intramuscular fat, the one actually inside the muscle, and it's still got sort of white cracks in there, showing that there was still some fat. It was still very moist when you ate it, and it was gorgeous because of that. And there's also the intermuscular fat, the seam fat, and what you can see there is it's just a beautiful snow white colour, which just means it's just a nice fat for using elsewhere if you want to render it down to make lard or something like that. Just all in all, this was a terrific leg of pork from HEB, so thank you HEB. Give it a go.